If you installed raylib using the Windows installer from itch.io, then you'll find that included with your built source of raylib, you also have a copy of Notepad++. This copy of Notepad++ is not a totally stock copy of Notepad++. In fact, it is a copy of Notepad++ that comes preloaded with the NppExec plugin, among other things, and some specified scripts to help you get started quickly with raylib. The standard script that you'll find yourself using at the very beginning is the raylib compile execute. At the top of this file, we're setting the raylib path, we're setting the compiler path, we're setting which compiler to use, we're setting a list of compiler flags that will properly link the raylib library and its dependencies, as well as provide an icon for the executable. There's some logic here to delete an old executable if it's still there, save the current file, and then finally compile the program, and if the compile was successful, it'll run. The first time you run Notepad++ for raylib, it'll probably point to this example. This core basic window.c is something of a minimal raylib example. It's kind of like your hello world for raylib. You might be tempted to start making changes and saving and testing your changes and trying to figure out how raylib works. And I think that's fair, but if you mouse over the document tab in the top left, you'll see that you'll be actually editing the official raylib examples file. So assuming you want to keep those raylib examples intact so that you can review them later, the first thing you want to do is do File, Save As, and put this in a different spot. I'm going to save this to a new folder called My Project, and I'm going to rename this to main.c. I'm also going to cut down this example code a little bit just so it's a little easier to read at my font size. Now that I've saved this to a new place and cut down the example, I want to make sure I didn't break anything. So plugins, NppExec, execute NppExec script, or you can just press F6. Make sure raylib compile execute is selected and hit OK. And there I have it. There is my raylib example window. As long as you have that set up, you'll be able to press F6 and enter and compile the current file into an executable at any size. You can add as much as you want to this file. You can have a bunch of user-defined functions. You can have struct definitions and all kinds of logic. But the second you want to split it out into new files, you're going to have a problem. If I use Control-N, I can open a new tab. And if I do Control-Alt-S, I can save as, and I'm going to make a header file. In my header file, I'm just going to define some constants. And if we compile this, we can see there's no issue. So including headers is not going to give us any trouble. And that's simply because include is something that is a preprocessor directive and doesn't require any changes to how we compile the code, basically. Since constants is in the same path as the main.c is, it can implicitly find it, and that's fine. Now I've created an object.h, which we know will include just fine, but I've also created an object.c. If I go back to main and we include object here, I'll go ahead and add some logic to use it. I'm also going to copy in some basic resources here since I want to use these for these objects. This basic logic should initialize each of the objects with their own unique textures and draw them one by one. Of course, when I hit compile here, we're going to have a linker error. We have undefined references to object draw. But naturally, as I said, we're not compiling the other C file. If we look at the actual script here, this name part is taking the name part of the current file. So if it's main.c, it's saying main. So it's compiling right here in this step, it's only compiling main.c. And in this step, it's checking if main.exe exists. So what that means is if I select object C and run the same script, it's going to try to compile object.exe. And we're going to get a different kind of linker error here, which is undefined reference to win main. So that's actually the context of the entry point for the program is missing. So that simple compile execute script is really great as long as you don't intend to have any implementation in separate files. And there's nothing stopping me from taking the implementation of object.c and pasting it right into object.h like this. So I could have my object here and then have my function I can include it into the other file, and this will work. But you're not going to see this being a very popular choice. And if I was to suggest this to you and wrap the video up here, I would get a lot of upset people. I'm going to show you a couple ways that we can add extra source files to your Notepad++ project, and I promise you they're very simple. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use Control-A to select all and copy this script, and we're going to move into temporary script and paste the compile execute script into here. This way we can edit it and we'll actually be able to update the script based on our needs. At the top, I'm going to set project name. I'll just call this my_project. And anywhere that we say name part, I'm going to replace that with project name. Now on this last CC line, instead of writing file name, I'm going to write out my C files, main.c and object.c with a space between them. So now if I hit OK, and you can see here, I'll show you, here's the header, here's the C file, and you can see it still opened up the game. And if we actually take a peek inside of the NppExec console, then we can see gcc o myproject.exe, main.c and object.c are the inputs. So if your plan is to very rarely introduce new C files and you don't intend to add a ton, then this right here could be your solution. All that you have to do is copy that other script over and you can make these changes. And as long as you never delete this, I think this will probably stay. Though maybe if you restart the computer, this will not be persisted. This is not a long-term solution. This is called temporary script for a reason. You can save it. We call it multi-C compilation. And basically what you can do is just make changes to this file as desired, and anytime you make a change, you can just go ahead and hit save again. So let's add another file, for example. I'm going to borrow from my 2048 project and grab this grid C and grid H. In my script, I'll just add grid C and hit save. Okay, I mean, of course, we're not using grid. Let me just... Yeah, we're not seeing a grid because it's empty. It has no parameters, but the linker would give an error if this function wasn't being linked properly. So if that's something you're happy with, then that's fine. You can leave it there. As you add new C files, you can just add them to this list and there's no problems there. The thing is, if you're going to build even just a medium-sized project and you're going to have many C files and you might even be adding them and removing them as you go, then maintaining this list is obviously error-prone. And, you know, I mean, it's fine for a really simple test and for quick things, but there is another solution that's not much extra work that is very scalable. The next approach we're going to look at is using a makefile. Thankfully, a number of makefiles are provided with our installation of raylib. So if we go into raylib, examples, then we can see there's a makefile right here. So I'm going to copy that into my project directory. Now, if we open this makefile in Notepad++, you're going to see that it is a very large file. Don't worry, I don't expect you to know all of this. I don't even think that I know all of this, but I think you'll be able to follow my changes here and modify this to be able to use it very quickly. The first thing is right here near the top, I feel like this is kind of a mistake because the rest of this makefile is super great. We can see that we're setting the raylib path here, and then we're using the raylib source path, and we're not using the raylib path in that. So first things first, I'm going to update the raylib path to raylib, and I'm also going to update this to actually use the raylib path that we're setting above. So once you've made this change here, we can actually jump almost all the way to the bottom. Down to around line 480, you're going to see define source code object files required, and you're going to see this very long row of a bunch of indented file names. So we're going to start here, and we're going to drag down, 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 all the way to here, all the way to the end of this generic compilation pattern. So around line 680. So that we want to leave the clean can stay, but all of that stuff can go. Press backspace, and I'm going to click in the margin here and just place a little mark so I don't forget, because I need to put something else here. Because right now what I've just done is remove all of the logic to actually build anything. So now we have no logic for building. We're going to take that from a different spot. So I go back into raylib examples, and we can go up directory and into the projects folder. And we can see here we have VS Code, and this is the make file that I like to steal. So we're going to open this up in Notepad++ as well. And we're not going to make any changes to this file. What we need to do is get down near the bottom again. And this time we want to go from right above clean, and we want to take all the way up to our wildcard. So about line 381 to line 347. So the thing at the top of the selection we want is this R wildcard, and the thing we want at the bottom is this compile source files note. This pattern will compile every module defined on objects. So we're going to copy this region, and I'm going to close this because I don't want to accidentally make any changes to that one. And I'm going to paste here. Most of this is pretty good. I found a fair bit of success actually. See right here we have makefile params equals project name. If you plan on compiling for Android, I will say this guide is not for you. I'm sorry. We're going to exclude Android from this here. I'm going to cut this project name and paste it over the makefile parameters on this line. So all makefile parameters, that becomes project name. Now I can remove that whole, this whole section right here, makefile Android. I can remove this. And the last thing I'm going to do is grab this section right here, source dir object dir, and I'm going to just change the source to a dot and the object also to a dot. Now that we've prepared the makefile, we need to update our NppExec script to call the makefile adequately. Now there is a raylib makefile NppExec script here, but I'm not super happy with how it's set up. So we're just going to copy the compile execute again, and we're going to trim it down to what I would prefer the flow should be. So I'll copy this. I'll go into a temporary script. Same as before, we're going to set project name. The C flags and the LD flags, we're going to take those out. Here we're saying end set path to compiler path. And we're setting compiler path on the line above. I'm just going to copy this compiler path and paste it right here. So I can just get rid of a line. I'm actually going to move this compiler up above, and I'm going to create some white space just so that we can see what's relevant here. Clean latest build is something that I'm going to take away. I don't think that's necessary. Saving current file, I also don't think that's necessary. We have compile program, and we used to check the version of the compiler and then actually run the compiler by invoking specific files. We're not going to do that anymore. We've created a make file, so now all we have to do is run the command make, just the word make. Reset environment, I don't think this is necessary, partly because I want to make the script smaller, but also because I'm going to add a bunch of other environment variables, and I don't want to have to unset all of them. Just like we did before, since we switched to using project name, we have to update this name part to be project name. However, we don't actually want to use this dollar and then these parentheses anymore, because these, which are all currently set, I'm going to add env underscore to the beginning of each of these sets, because I actually want to move all of these to be environment variables. So since it's now an environment variable, we actually need to use percentage. The reason we need these to be env set is because in the makefile, note this notation here. So we're not just saying project name equals raylib examples. We're saying project name question mark equals. And what this means is define it if it hasn't already been defined. So this is like a default definition for project name. So if we don't set project name as an environment variable, then this is not going to happen. Same thing goes for raylib path, raylib source path, all these other things. So in the script, we're using env set. And that's because I don't want to use these values that are in the makefile. I don't want my project to be called raylib examples. And furthermore, if I copy this folder and start a new project, I don't want to have to go into the makefile and edit it to change the name of my project. I'd rather just change it from this NppExec script. Anyhow, we should probably make sure this thing actually works, huh? I'm going to go ahead and run this. Okay, yeah, it's working just fine. And let's be clear, I'm going to go ahead and remove any intermediary files. So all these .o files and the exe, I'm going to remove all of that, and we'll start it again. Okay, looks like it's working. Just as a side note here, if you intend to use C++ instead of C, raylib doesn't require any additional work other than that we should update the extensions to be .cpp so that it's clear that we're using C++ in those files. And where it says env-set cc equals gcc, you can just change this cc to a ++, and now it will use the C++ compiler, and we can use C++ inside of these code files. If you're interested in mixing C and C++ types, my most recommended method is to check out the sister video to this one, where we explore game premake, which allows you to use VS Code or Visual Studio, among other editors. And that project is already configured to infer the source type of a file and compile it appropriately. If you don't want to lose this script, you're going to want to hit save, and I'm just going to call this raylib custom makefile. Now, I love Notepad++, but even with these NppExec considerations, there's just too many features I rely on that are missing here. It's difficult to track errors. Even if you make the console very big or bring it to a separate window, it's just not very cozy. With other editors, you can click on the error, it jumps you right to the part of the source code where the error is present. Sometimes it even puts your caret right on the symbol that is wrong. It's very convenient. We don't have that here. Autocomplete is intermittent at best, but more realistically, it's missing. Notepad++ doesn't have the kind of language interpretation servers that larger editors use, and that's by design. Notepad++ is meant to be very lightweight and be widely compatible, and something like a full-on language interpreter would just bloat so many aspects of the software so much. Another thing that's not easy is jumping to other headers. You know, normally I could just like control click on this and jump to its definition. I can right click and say open file, but it's not a path, so it doesn't know how to do that. Maybe it's possible to add a plugin command that can do it, so maybe there's something there, but I mean, that's a lot of extra work. Notepad++ also doesn't have any breakpoint debugging, which for new programmers probably doesn't sound like a big deal, because from my personal experience of having been a new programmer, it took a long time for me to be exposed to any breakpoint debugging. But considering there's many free editors out there like Visual Studio Code or even Visual Studio Community that do support breakpoint debugging, it's hard to say that it's a premium feature and it's something that Notepad++ shouldn't have. So if you're developing on a very underpowered system, or you just prefer a simpler and more retro approach, Notepad++ for raylib is great. But in the video linked in the cards and in the description, I will talk about the game premake template, which allows you to build raylib projects from many different editors, including VS Code and Visual Studio, which are the two that I look at in the video. That project is also configured to work with a makefile out of the box, so realistically any editor that allows you to invoke a makefile will work. If you're not interested in Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio and you have some other editor that you like, the game premake template also uses a min.gw batch script that you can use to set up the environment, and there's even just a straight up makefile, so lots of compatibility with other editors. If you're interested in seeing more raylib coverage like this, particularly with C, you're encouraged to subscribe so you won't miss what I post next. Hopefully this helped. Happy coding!